Hi, everybody. I'm Josh Lee at Altinity, and I'm joined today by Alexander Zaitsev and Robert Hodges, the CTO and CEO of Altinity. And we're going to talk a little bit about open source and what it means to Altinity and to ClickHouse. So with that, Alexander, would you like to tell us a little bit about how you came to found Altinity?
And before Altinity, I worked in a company who did digital marketing. And we actually tried different databases. We started with open source MySQL at small scale, and it worked great up to the level. And then we moved to Oracle, which is of course not an open source commercial database. It's great if you do it in Oracle style, but it was not just good for our use case, and our data was growing 3 times every year. Then we moved back to MySQL, which is kind of unexpected, but to the special version of MySQL, which already had a columnar storage. It is currently called TokuDB engine, and it worked great, but again, the data was growing and growing and growing, and we went again to commercial database, which was called Vertica and still called Vertica, which is absolutely awesome analytical database that was not a first of a kind, but a first successful commercial analytical columnar database, if I recall correctly. And it was great, but it was expensive. So as the data grows, you start to pay more and more for license, and license is bound to the storage size, right? So during several years, we were looking for an open source alternative and tried a lot of different things that existed in early 2010s. Eventually, ClickHouse popped up as a newcomer from Yandex. Nobody knew that Yandex is doing something interesting in databases that time. And we were very skeptical initially because open source database from Yandex. Is it fast? Is it good? Nobody knows. But we decided to give it a try, and it was complete success. It was complete success. It outperformed Vertica, and it was free because it is open source. And this is how I met Alexey Milovidov, who is creator of ClickHouse. And I discussed it with Peter, who is was CEO of Percona at that time, and he asked me, "Do you want to found a company to make ClickHouse better, and especially better suited for enterprises?" Because ClickHouse was built in-house, and it was very immature compared to enterprise databases like Vertica. So I said, of course. And this is how we founded Altinity with the help of Peter and some other folks. And we're still here, there, and growing.
Great, great. And Robert, could you introduce yourself and tell us about what brought you on board?
Sure. My name is Robert Hodges. I'm CEO of Altinity. I've been working at Altinity since the 1st of January on 2019. The way I got on board in a word or in one sentence is I was a good friend of Alexander's. So he and I met back in, I've been working on databases for decades, and he and I met back in 2003 when we were working together on a SaaS product that was based on Oracle. So we we're working on the code for that, but also involved databases. And we both passed, went to other companies after that, but we retained, stayed friends. And meanwhile, I was running a company called Continuant, which did database clustering in the MySQL market. And we ended up selling that to VMware. So I was working at VMware at the time, and Alexander, we were in constant contact, and he said, "Hey, I found a database, and I think you might be interested in it." And it took me a couple of years to get around to it because, I was sort of involved in projects at VMware. But when we finally had a chance to really look at it together and discuss it, it became apparent that this was an absolutely groundbreaking database. It was ClickHouse. It was open source then. It had astounding speed. It used a lot of the principles of distributed systems to create to allow people to build applications that had guaranteed low latency response, and it was able to perform well on virtual machines, which was something near and dear to my heart at the time at VMware, and it was clear that it would work great in clouds. And so I thought, wow, this looks like something really interesting. I want to get involved. And so I came on board. As it turned out, they needed a CEO, somebody located in the Bay Area, close to some of the businesses we were interested in, close to sources of venture capital. So I came on board, and it's been incredibly fun since then. It's one of the most interesting databases I've ever worked on.
Okay, that's great. So Robert, you mentioned you both mentioned how ClickHouse is open source. So let's talk about that a little bit. What got you into open source, and how does it drive your work at Altinity? And we'll start with Robert.
Yeah, the first thing is to explain why it is I like open source. And I think for most people who work on open source products, the connection tends to be pretty personal at some level. And for me, it's the fundamental thing about open source is it allows me to understand what's going on inside. I'm one of those people that just wants to know what makes clocks tick, what's going on inside the car, and in this case, what's going on exactly inside the database. And the great thing about open source, and in fact, one of the so-called 4 freedoms of open source, is to be able to look at the code and figure out exactly what it's doing. So there are other things that open source gives you, but I think that's the single most important thing at a personal level that motivates me to work on open source and to try and keep software open. Open source is fundamental to what we do at Altinity because it is our market. So it is the way that we distribute technology to people. It is the way that we make contacts with people who are using this technology. Moreover, it is the way that we develop the technology. So our own projects at Altinity, which include many, many contributions to ClickHouse, are done in collaboration with the ClickHouse community. Plus, we have our own projects that we maintain, and those we also have communities around those. Like our latest version of our Kubernetes operator had about 20 new contributors on it. So this is something that's just in our blood and is one of the foundations of the business and everything we do.
Yeah, I can add to it. So Robert mentioned that we market to open source, but why different companies are using open source databases and ClickHouse in particular? This is actually an interesting question because without them using it, it wouldn't be any market. And they're using it because of several things, as we understand. First, maybe this is the same as Robert mentioned. They want to understand exactly how database operates, and an ability to look into source code is probably the best way to understand its internals. But I think this is a fraction of the users who really wants to do it. Another probably bigger category of users, they actually like open source because it's free. You don't need to pay a license. Of course, it's free, right? But not all free software is good, right? And I think that probably one of the main drivers for companies to use open source is not because it's free, but because it is very rapidly changing, usually. And ClickHouse is a great example of the database which rapidly changing, and it's improving, it's getting more and more features. And also it very rapidly reacts to users' needs. If somebody wants a feature for Oracle, right, you can wait several years to be implemented if it's not on a roadmap, right? If somebody wants a feature for ClickHouse, it may take a couple of days or even hours it to be implemented. And this is the fundamental benefit of open source technologies, because everybody can change it, everybody can contribute to it and make it better and better for the users. And we have a lot of users who adapt ClickHouse for their own needs by making contributions by themselves, or using our engineers, or using somebody else.
I think that's a really important point that, in addition to these personal connections to open source that we may have, we believe as a business that this is a value, this ability to evolve open source, to control what it does, to be able to control the economic costs. so on and so forth. These are things that we want to deliver to customers. We think that's fundamental value. And in fact, our business is basically allow people to use open source effectively. Where we particularly add value is we give them the knowledge, we give them the management tools, and we give them the support that's necessary to, to make this successful. As Alexander says, not every open source package is good. The other thing is open source stacks are complicated. So you need people that you can partner with that have deep knowledge in what's going on in the projects and in the technology. And that's one of the fundamental things that makes companies successful.
Great. How would you say that open source influences Altinity's mission?
So all our business is built on open source because we're using open source tools. We're contributing back to open source tools. We're providing support to open source tools. So it's actually the core of our business model. We're doing it not because we don't have anything else to do, but because we believe this is the right model for users to use software. They get many benefits from open source, especially with open source with a good community compared to some commercial offerings, which are kind of bounded in their own corporate standards. Let's put it this way.
Yeah, you asked how does open source influence Altinity's mission? Well, I think it influences in kind of obvious ways externally, the way that we interact with users and contributors. There's sort of a motion that you have inside open source communities, but there's another way that open source has influenced us. Altinity is in its heart an open source company, and we use the same mechanisms of distributed development and community, sort of remote work and things that you see in a typical open source project. That's how our company works. So we actually have 52 people in the company right now. They're spread out over something like 17 countries. And we use the same mechanisms that open source communities use to function, to share information, to get things done. We use them inside Altinity. So it's very much part of our culture and the way we operate.
So you mentioned some of the open source projects that Altinity has contributed, like the Operator and Clickhouse-backup. I want to talk about those, but first, let's talk about Altinity's contributions to the ClickHouse Core project. Can you highlight some of those?
Yes. We started contributing to ClickHouse in 2018. And the reason to do it was because our users or customers, they asked for features that were missing in ClickHouse. Now ClickHouse is much richer than it used to be 5 or 7 years ago. And the demand for such work is probably lower. But at early times, ClickHouse lacked a lot of things. And the core development team couldn't address everything. So we stepped up and started to work with our customers and implement features for them that we were looking for. We started small with some just simple functions, but then we worked very deeply on enterprise features like LDAP, for example, integration with LDAP, or some security features, or features around storage, especially object storage. So we did a lot of work in the last years, and we continue to do so. So we now focus more on some future developments of ClickHouse, just extending its use in other areas, for example, to data lakes, just to make ClickHouse better and applicable to wider spectrum of use cases.
All right, so let's talk about the Altinity Operator. What inspired its development, and as a developer or DevOps engineer, why should I use it?
So initially, we had a corporate customer who asked us and funded the first development of Operator, first couple of versions, because they had some internal desire to manage all internal infrastructure, including databases, using operators. And they asked us, can you build operator? We said, we will try, because at that time, we had zero experience in Kubernetes, zero experience in Go language, which is used in Kubernetes development, including operators, and of course, zero experience in operator. We started from scratch, totally from scratch. And it took us several months to get up to speed, but then as you use and develop more and more, you kind of get to the taste, I don't know how to say it in English properly, and you started to like it more and more. And now I think we have addiction to operators, addiction to Kubernetes, and everything that we build nowadays, we build for Kubernetes. I can also add that 5 years back, it was not certain if Kubernetes is a good platform for databases in general. And that's why we were skeptical about operators. And it took several years, and we actually helped in this motion to assure community and users that Kubernetes is a platform for databases. So we run everything in Kubernetes now with operators in clouds or on-prem, and we're happy with the results. Getting back to the project itself, right? It started small, but it ended up to be one of the most popular operators for databases in general. It is surpassed only by Postgres, if I recall correctly. And we measure popularity by number of stargazers. So it's extremely popular, and it is very, very functionally rich, I would say. But I'm biased, of course.
I'll give my biased opinion about why people should use it, which was also part of your question. It's very robust, and operators in general were a groundbreaking feature in Kubernetes, because they allowed people to define new resources in Kubernetes. So to take a database and define, the shards, the replicas, and all the other things in it in a few lines of YAML, but they also allowed you to associate procedures with it. So the ability, for example, to do a rolling upgrade on a database, which is a non-trivial operation if you want to do it while the database is live with applications connected. So the ClickHouse-operator that we built at Altinity does this. Moreover, we've used it for years. It runs in our own cloud. There are literally thousands of clusters worldwide, probably tens of thousands actually, that run on the Altinity operators. So it has been battle tested. We do see people, coming into Kubernetes and they don't use the operator. And our first question is usually, well, why not? Because it's difficult to create those features from scratch. So in the end, most people do tend to gravitate toward using the Altinity operator, and we recommend it highly. And one of the things that's really cool to see is it's developed its own little community, which is now where we have people from large companies like IBM all the way down to mom and pop shops are adding features to it, as well as using the operator. So it's definitely community driven and very, very focused on making ClickHouse work well in Kubernetes environments.
Clickhouse-backup is another tool that you mentioned. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
It has been started by another person in another company in order to automate the function that was missing in ClickHouse at the time. So now ClickHouse has its own implementation of backup internally inside the database, which is different from what Clickhouse-backup does, but we can discuss it a bit later. 5 or 7 years ago, there was nothing like that. But everybody who works with data needs to back it up and be able to reliably store backups, manage multiple backups, restore it in different locations, and so on. And this is what ClickHouse-backup has been originally built for. That's for the needs of a single company, but it has been built in open source. And it started to gain more and more popularity, and a lot of, again, different contributors started to add features on that. But then something else happens. The guy who was original developer and maintainer on this operator he left the company who was using it in their business, and had no interest and no time, which is more important, to maintain it and to support it furthermore. But the project was great, and we couldn't let it go and be abandoned. That's why we reached the guy and convinced him. It was actually pretty easy. He was very open to that. Convinced him to donate this project to us and let us to maintain and develop it further. And this is what we're doing for the last, I don't know, four years maybe, right, Robert? And it is a good management tool with a lot of capabilities. Some of capabilities we even never used by ourselves because it can be contributed by some other people's, like support for some exotic storages that exist only in China, right? So we cannot use it, but we know that it works in clickhouse-backup because other people use it. And this is great in open source. So if the project kind of evolves on its own and gets better and better with everybody's help.
And Clickhouse-backup has been embedded in Altinity.cloud for 4 years, and like the clickhouse-operator, which we also developed, it's one of these things where just by running it in these demanding environments, for example, people running ClickHouse servers that have 30 terabytes of attached storage, we've really been able to battle test it and ensure that it works under pretty demanding conditions. I think the other thing is it's an example of a project where, like many others, there's just we have a very good engineer who's the lead for it, and we have just continuously integrated PRs from other people, added our own features, have a regular release cadence, and it's now a really, really useful tool. It's one of my favorite pieces of software associated with ClickHouse.
What's the license on the operator and clickhouse-backup?
We're Apache 2.0 for everything basically everything we do, unless it's a project that we're somehow working on that already had another license. ClickHouse itself is Apache 2.0 licensed. So in general, things in the ecosystem follow that license.
Okay, that brings us to a sort of a big topic. In the last year or so, the community has seen a lot of open source rug pulls via licensing changes. So what would you say to somebody who's concerned about using ClickHouse for this reason?
I would say that, first of all, it is a valid concern. There is a pattern in these open source relicensing or rug pulls, as some people call them, where you have a project that is run by a single company, and at some point that company decides it's in their economic interest to force people to pay for the software. This has happened many times, and so ClickHouse does fit that pattern. The trademarks for the ClickHouse project, copyrights to the code in the project are owned by ClickHouse Incorporated. So you could argue, yes, they have some motivation, or they will have some motivation at a future time to do this. So a valid concern. On the other hand, if you look at ClickHouse, one of the things that's really remarkable about it is the size and diversity of the community. The PRs that are the pull requests that are accepted into ClickHouse that add new features are contributed by literally hundreds of people worldwide. And there are a very, very large number of companies that have made major contributions to ClickHouse and also have major investments in systems on ClickHouse. So I think that even if there were a rug pull, it is extremely likely that a new community would spring up around an open source, a version of ClickHouse that remains open source, much as we've seen with projects like OpenSearch, which was the open source track for Elastic when they relicensed, Valkey, which is the open source track for Redis when it was relicensed. I think something like that would happen with ClickHouse. The community is just too big to go away.
So that brings up an interesting point, which is Altinity doing anything to guarantee the long-term openness of ClickHouse?
Yes, we are. Build a strong community. I think in the end, what drives open source projects and what enables them to survive over time is that there's a community of people who are devoted to, uh, and devoted to it and see the value in it, so that they continue investing and using the software. So we do that ourselves, of course. We have made a wide range of contributions, many hundreds of PRs to ClickHouse itself. We have a large server team. We do builds of ClickHouse, which are designed for enterprise use. They have long-term support. So we do a bunch of contributions that ensure that there's open source software, or to contribute both to the core ClickHouse itself as well as vital ecosystem projects. But the other thing we do is do everything we can to maintain community around ClickHouse and to promote open source communities in particular. A really good example of one of the things that we do around open source communities is we run a conference called OSACon, which is open source analytics. And the goal here is to bring together everyone who is interested, not just in ClickHouse, but in open source analytics in general, and to promote communities, to promote cross-fertilization between the different projects and the communities behind them. These are all things that we do to try and strengthen the community and make sure that it'll be around for a long time to come.
I can add a little bit to that. So if we get back to the beginning of our interview, we were discussing what open source means for Altinity, and it is everything. So, and this is a guarantee that we will be maintain the open source ecosystem in ClickHouse, around ClickHouse, because without that, there is no Altinity.
And I think open source is just such an interesting area. I mean, there's so many ways that you can contribute to it and and improve it. I mean, just for example, one of the things we do is we provide education to people, through YouTube videos, through blog articles, things like that. And there's also, I think there's also another interesting thing about open source that you want to promote, and that's to, as much as possible, to promote a healthy environment for other vendors around ClickHouse to make money. And this doesn't sound like, because we've talked about open source being free. So why do you care about vendors making money? Well, you want a group of people who are devoted to the project, who are contributing to it, and are profitable so that they'll be around for a really long time. When you get that, and you have that in the Kubernetes community around Kubernetes projects, you have that around Linux, you have that around Postgres, that's one of the things that ensures projects will remain viable and continue to evolve over time. And as a practical matter, we collaborate as much as possible with other vendors to help build ClickHouse in productive and interesting ways, so that it serves users better. And by that, we feel like we're trying to do our part to maintain this healthy ecosystem of people who support ClickHouse and will ensure that it continues to advance.
In your last answer, Robert, you mentioned Postgres. Why do you think an open source database in particular is important?
I think that this comes down to sort of a value judgment about how we advance technology in general. And one of the things that has characterized the development of the internet is that which is probably the largest single software endeavor in the history of the industry, is that it has these building blocks which are all open source. It was developed through an open process. There are many people have contributed to it. There are things like domain name servers, which have been open source and developed and defined by open specifications from the beginning. There is a huge value to society to having fundamental building blocks be available to everyone. And databases are one of those building blocks. Of course, being able to do TCP/IP is even more basic, but databases like Postgres, databases like MySQL, like ClickHouse, like other open source, to have those databases out in the open and available to any business leads to just huge amounts of creativity where people can build value on top of it. I think the most recent example of that is if we look at the evolution of Kubernetes, that has been protected by a series of foundations or open source projects managed by the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And that has been a huge success because it's basically created this foundation, if you will, for cloud native computing. I think that's fundamentally why Kubernetes has good ideas, but I think it's this system of open source combined with a foundation that has been incredibly productive in leading to this flood of creative applications in the cloud.
I can also add that from my perspective, the open source technologies, they in a major degree drove the development of internet in general. Because if we look back into 15, 20 years, there was a notion of LAMP stack, Linux, Apache, PHP, MySQL, all four fundamental open source technologies that allowed hundreds of thousands people to build their websites, build their web applications for e-commerce for different purposes. And that was a revolution in terms of how many different stuff started to appear in Kubernetes. Of course, that core technologies were probably not ideal, but that was a foundation, the basis that allowed people to come with some innovations to the industry.
Yeah, and I think it's also, if you just look at the value of the innovation in this area, open source communities can innovate very, very rapidly because they do a couple of things. One is they crowdsource the development. So instead of having the resources of a single company, you actually have resources combined from many companies. Second thing is they allow people who have concrete problems to contribute to the fixes. And this has the effect of accelerating innovation. And I think it's kind of interesting that if you look at a lot of the major technologies that are driving databases today in one form or another, many of them have been started out as open source projects, which then, thanks to rapid innovation and use by a lot of people, then became building blocks in much larger systems. So it's really great. In summary, it's just a great way to develop technologies and advance the state of the art.
Maybe a very last addition to that, it is the open source nature of those technologies makes it also very easy for newcomers to enter.
Yes.
So with this LAMP stack, everybody could start building their something.
Yeah.
10 years before, in 90s, you are on Windows, you need to somehow get this internet server, whatever, right? I don't know what you will use in order to build applications. So it's a lot of different software, and it's probably paid software. It's not easy to get from somewhere. Once you get to the open source stack, everybody can start from scratch, just download this and start developing something new. So this is extremely good for industry development. A lot of teenagers started from that, right? And now they are probably bosses of big companies.
I was one of those teenagers. So, okay, that's great. Why do you believe that it's important for ClickHouse in particular to remain an open source database?
Why should ClickHouse remain an open source database? Well, I think it's just one of these fundamental building blocks that allows people to build incredibly creative and valuable applications. I think it is this is something that I think maintaining that goal will will drive enormous value for the people that use it. I think from the perspective as a vendor, I mean, we use ClickHouse obviously, but we make money off it. It also enables us to have viable businesses, us and many other companies as well. So having us, all operator on this core it just seems like a win-win for everybody. So and that's leaving aside our own personal biases toward open source, which are very, very strong, as you've probably seen from other parts of this interview. But I think it's an unadulterated good thing, and that's why we support it and we do everything in our power to promote it.
I would also discuss a little bit why we think this is an important building block. So what is ClickHouse in general? It is an analytical database. What is an analytical database? This is a database which is capable of processing huge amounts of data very fast. If you look back 15 years ago, there was need for ClickHouse. There was no need for ClickHouse at all. You could do everything with MySQL and Postgres. And 10 years ago, the demand started to grow. Now you cannot live without analytical databases because there is a lot of data. You have a lot of data from observability. You have a lot of data from internet systems that you develop, and you cannot feed this data into databases like MySQL or Postgres, which are built on different principles and for different use cases. You need an analytical database. And ClickHouse is the most obvious choice for now. If it will disappear, something else will emerge. But this is a building block which needs to be filled.
So we talked a little bit about, sort of the economics of open source. Let's dig into that a little bit more. How does maintaining an open source model benefit Altinity's customers and also the broader community?
That's an important question because the values of open source to customers, having these, as we've talked about, these building blocks that perform very important functions, like in the case of ClickHouse, being able to scan very, very large amounts of data and come back with an answer in a second or two. That's a really basic feature that's important for hundreds of different types of applications. And so being able to have this open source building block, it's something that people can quickly adopt it, they can test it out, they can evolve it, they can adapt it with other open source software to build systems that are then allow them to build important, important applications. And it's an enabler for many businesses. If you look at if you imagine a world in which ClickHouse were not there, or there were not other open source alternatives for to do analytics, there's a bunch of businesses that simply wouldn't exist. I think a great example is most businesses which do web analytics would have difficulty existing if they didn't have a very high speed database like ClickHouse available, openly licensed, so it could be used in any way that users want. Moreover, there's an important feature about open source is that you get to make decisions not just about using it, but the way that you use it. So you can make your own decisions about, like how much compute do you apply, how, where do you go to find cheap storage, things like that. These are all things that are possible to do with open source, and they make the economics for many of these companies work. Without them, they wouldn't exist.
Can you discuss any challenges you faced in advocating for open source within the enterprise database space?
That's a tough question. So usually when we're talking to customers, they come to us because they know ClickHouse and they know that ClickHouse is open source. So we don't need to advocate open source to them. They already advocated it internally somehow. So maybe from my experience, we were advocating ClickHouse internally in my previous company, right? But it was a very easy task because of the cost difference. So often the cost is often a factor, and for some companies, and it is easy to argue about. But there are of course other factors that many companies consider, like a quality of support. If you're using enterprise database, you typically have a good enterprise support packaged with a license. In open source, it's not always the case, and that was actually one of the reasons we founded Altinity. We wanted to provide this enterprise level of support for the open source database like ClickHouse. And it helped us to get a lot of enterprise deals, because when we talk to people, when they recognize that the level of support we are providing, they trust us and trust ClickHouse much more. and in many cases, this is a deal breaker.
Yeah, I have an interesting challenge that we run into in open source quite a bit, and that is that because it's free, people sometimes underestimate the fact that they still need to invest in it. And I'll give you a concrete example. It's if you can just grab software and begin to use it, uh, you'll just go ahead and build a system, and you won't really. You'll have a tendency to think, "Hey, why should I ask anybody else? I'll just build it myself because it's here, it's open, I can see it." And the fact is that you will often build a system that's bad because the fact that something is open source doesn't mean it uh, it's easy to use, doesn't mean that there aren't issues that require expertise to solve. And so we often see this challenge in open source projects. By contrast, if your company spends $1 million on a contract to Oracle, you've got some skin in the game to make it successful. And what'll happen is your management is actually paradoxically willing to spend more money to make sure, to get expertise, to get expert DBAs to make sure that that investment works out. So this is this kind of paradoxical effect that you see in open source. And I think one of the most challenging problems that we have with people who are using databases like ClickHouse as well as other software is just to convince them, hey, yes, it's open. Yes, you can do anything you want. But wait a second, let's step back, think about the problem you're solving, understand how this particular piece of software can be used most effectively, shape your problem to match its capabilities, and then build a great system where you get the full value. That's a challenge that I think is it's not unique to open source, but it's particularly prominent, and I think it's just because of the fact people they don't spend money on it, so they don't really have skin in the game to make sure that it's truly successful.
How do you encourage contributions from external developers and users to the ClickHouse projects that Altinity participates in?
Yeah, I one of the things is we just try in our own projects, we just try to be as friendly as possible and try to make ClickHouse or try to make the ClickHouse community to be as welcoming as possible when somebody's coming in and they're trying something. uh, what we want to do is help them, because everybody is a newbie at some point in their career. So be friendly, help them, uh, wish them good luck, and just make the community seem like a place that they want to be in and contribute to. Then beyond that, for the projects, particularly where we have direct control, we love to get contributions, and we try to encourage people if they see something they really want. It's like, hey, tell us what it is. That's helpful, but it's even more helpful if you go write some code and fix the problem or add the feature that you want, and then we will incorporate it into the product, release it, test it, and also acknowledge your contribution. So I think these are all ways that we try to encourage people to make these contributions.
Yeah, we just listen to users. Listening to users, listen to contributors is very, very important. And people feel that we're listening, and it encourages them to tell us more, to contribute more, and so on.
And I think there's also an important thing. You lead by example. So, I've mentioned that we've done hundreds of PRs to ClickHouse. We have our own projects, which are licensed under Apache 2.0. We provide blog articles, we provide videos. We just try and contribute as much as we can to the community to provide an example that we hope other people will imitate, because God knows we benefit from their contributions as well. I can't tell you how many times we've gone to people who are technically competing with us to go read their blog articles about how to use ClickHouse correctly. Some of them are just really great. And the more people who are doing that, the more, the more knowledge is shared, the more ways that the community and the software improve. These are all good things. So we try to encourage them by showing a good example ourselves.
Do you have any specific success stories of community collaboration that you'd like to share?
I think one of the most productive types of collaborations we've had is actually with our users. So one of the things that we do at Altinity is that we work with users, and they may run into problems. They run into missing features. Under the normal, normally under a support contract, if you hit a bug, hey, it's on us to go fix it. That's part of what we do. But there are also cases where users will identify gaps in what ClickHouse can do. And then one of the most productive relationships that you can have is somebody who's saying, hey, I need this problem solved, and I need this feature. And first of all, they'll help you frame the problem. Second, they will give you help in various ways that range from just, like critiquing your designs or making suggestions all the way up to applying funding to make projects happen. This is an incredibly powerful way to develop technology. And so I think I think open source lends itself to that kind of collaborative relationship because everything's out in the open. So the issues are discussed in the open. The code is out in the open. We don't have this barrier of, like a vendor behind some API and the users have no idea what's going on behind there and no way to influence it. So those collaborations are like the best part of the job, because we're able to work together and build something with their help that we couldn't build ourselves.
Yeah, that's a good point, Robert. So I can add that in traditional software development, there is typically a role of product manager who defines what the product should be. And then when the product is out, it is validated against users. In open source, it is quite an opposite. We listen to users first. They tell us what to do. We do it, validate that we did the right thing, and that it goes to the product. And this is a great example of collaboration.
Yeah, and I can give you a concrete example that I was in London for a few days back in August working with one of our biggest customers. And one of the things that made that collaboration incredibly fruitful is we are, as a company, we're deep on ClickHouse. So we know, about as much as anybody does about how ClickHouse works and how to use it effectively in applications. But what these guys had and what they brought to the table was, first of all, they had problems, application problems, which they understood very well. But the other interesting thing about users is they tend to look across database technologies. So there's an incredibly productive discussion about, looking at ClickHouse and then comparing it with other technologies that they had evaluated or were actually using and saying, oh, I like this. Like, hey, look at, what time series databases are doing to handle high cardinality data. Look at how different database projects handle things like separation of compute and storage. And so when when you have these people with different viewpoints, again, that leads to this incredibly fruitful collaboration where no one person has all the information, but you get us all together around a table. All of a sudden, we start to see connections, start to see solutions that wouldn't be possible otherwise. And in fact, that meeting was really critical for us for our current roadmap. We're now acting on many of the things that we learned in those during that time around the table with them.
So we talked about how the users influence the vision for the future of ClickHouse, which I just absolutely love that. What is your vision for the future of ClickHouse?
Well, my vision is kind of an old one. It's nothing new. The first time I met Alexei Milovidov, he said he wanted to make ClickHouse the most popular analytic database on the planet. That was in Madrid, Spain, back in the spring of 2019. I still think that's a great goal, and it's the goal we have for ClickHouse. If you're doing analytics, it should be the first thing you reach for. Beyond that, sort of specific things, I think the industry, to my mind, is at a really, really interesting inflection point because the volumes of data, particularly in the large applications that we see, have become so large that they no longer fit inside closed data warehouses. And by that, I mean a data warehouse where you have to load it in to actually be able to query it. A very large proportion of data lakes, our data is now landing in data lakes where it's also shared with AI, data science, and other applications. And so I think the really interesting problem for data warehouses is how do they adapt to that new world where they don't own all the data. And in fact, a majority of the data will never get loaded into the data warehouse directly. How is it that the data warehouses continue to add value? And I think there's many, many ways that they can, but it does require a rethinking of these architectures that have developed around closed tightly coupled data warehouse services and start to think about how to break those things out and use those capabilities on, bring those capabilities to the data, to the source data, and use them there. That's a really interesting problem to work on.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, ClickHouse originally started as a database for a server with a local storage, but over the years, it already developed to a cloud native database. And the next step is to develop it further when it is just compute for the data which is stored somewhere else. And we see this is happening right now.
How do you see Altinity contributing to that future?
Well, I think part of it is to put in the feature. I mean, this is open source software. Put in the features that allow ClickHouse to evolve in the direction of this new reality where the data is no longer entirely inside the data warehouse. So this can be things as simple as making ClickHouse work better with open formats. Great example. Over the last couple of years, it's become apparent that a huge amount of data is now in Parquet, which is an open format for storing column-based data. It was originally developed by Cloudera, and it's become dominant. So to the extent where when we walk in and talk to new customers, there's a really good chance they've got a bunch of data stored in it. So little things like that, making that work as fast as possible, all the way to features, like integration with Iceberg, better integration with event streams. There are many, many things that that we're working on, but we're particularly interested in the area of data lakes in particular.
Are there any, we may have covered this, so no is a fine answer. Are there any other upcoming projects or initiatives that you're excited about and that you'd like to share?
Working on these features that will enable ClickHouse, more efficient use of ClickHouse with data which is stored in data lakes. And the reason we're doing this is because we see there is a gap right now. First, there is a gap in technology. So far, there is Spark, which can be used for data lakes, but Spark is slow. It's not real time, but users, they use the real time queries, and they want to see a real time performance on the data which is stored in data lakes. And there is no good solution for that. On the other hand, ClickHouse has all prerequisites to be such a solution, but it is missing some features. And we are working on adding those features or by ourselves or working with some other contributors to make it happen. So that's probably the most important thing in open source that we're working on right now.
Yeah, and I think beyond that, it's because we've talked about how important it is for vendors to provide the things that make people successful with open source. So one of the other focus for us, besides pushing forward open source ClickHouse and the ecosystem projects that make it successful, is to adapt our own tools and our own offerings to make people successful in this new world. One of the things that's changing is that people are increased for these large data sets. People run things in their own environments. They don't want to move data into closed services. They don't want to be locked in. So how do you actually provide, but at the same time, managing something in somebody else's environment is a lot harder than just having a closed service where people just connect to it over the internet. So being able to master that model, it's called bring your own cloud, is a common way of describing it. This is something we've been working on intensively for a period of years. We see our business and our users are shifting to that model quite quickly. So the complementary initiative to these open source changes is to provide that management model as well as the support that's going to enable people to be successful with these new applications.
Awesome. So you mentioned that Robert, you mentioned your vision for ClickHouse is that, all users should choose it as their first choice for analytics databases. Why do you think that is?
a great database. I think that one of the things that I like about ClickHouse is I mean this is sort of personal as well as business reasons. Let me explain the personal parts. What I like about ClickHouse is it takes all the great things that I've learned about distributed systems and distributed data over the course of about 30 to 35 years, and it puts them into a single product. So, for example, it has the ability to distribute query over large distances. It deals with the problem that when data is spread out over many locations, you can never be quite sure about its consistency. These are all issues that ClickHouse handles in its design, and it makes choices that allow people to get the answers very, very fast without having to, for example, introduce things like expensive locking or other mechanisms that slow you down or fail, when something goes down in your system. So this is a reason why I think ClickHouse is a great database and one that people should use. Obviously, we want that. As a business, we support ClickHouse, so we want it to be successful. We have financial motivations as well, but I think those things both kind of go together and also put us in a position to, because we like ClickHouse, we can also think of ways that we can make it better for users and make their experience better.
I also think, and Robert will share this, that ClickHouse has some features from other databases that are now very successful, like MySQL. Why MySQL was so successful and still is? Because it's very simple. It's very simple to install. You install it and you can start using that immediately. You don't need anything. It's just a single binary, more or less. And ClickHouse is totally the same. So it shares this simplicity pattern.
Yeah,
and this is very cool.
It's absolutely cool. I think there's two analytic databases. We've talked about this new world of data lakes. We've talked about the fact that we need to bring the analytics to the data as opposed to bringing the data to the analytics. And I think there's two databases out there that have the capability to do this. The one is DuckDB, which is kind of like a pocket, sort of SQLite, but a column store. Very powerful, very flexible database that you can plug in anywhere, supports serverless operation very easily. I think the other one is ClickHouse. In addition to being a single binary, as Alexander said, it also just has all these different flexible ways that it can be combined. You have different types of table engines. It has the ability to integrate with many other different database types. These are things that you can weave together in data lakes and other environments to build, to use ClickHouse and in creative new ways to build new applications. So I think it's in a unique position to capitalize on this new world, and this is something that we support, and it's something we want to be part of, both for personal reasons, but also because we think it'll help us build a great company.
That's a great segue to our last question. How does a partner or service provider like Altinity fit into an open source service solution?
So Altinity fits into an open source solution by basically becoming part of your team at whatever level is appropriate for you. So we do at the most basic level, what we do is enable you to run ClickHouse anywhere you want it. So if you want to run it yourself, and traditionally that was how a lot of people got started on ClickHouse, great, we'll offer you support. We'll also offer you tools that you can use in your own environments. You can, of course, if you don't want to be bothered to run it, you just want to connect to it and get to work, we have a cloud, run it in our own cloud account. And then we have this middle ground where the management capabilities are in our cloud, but we are able to connect securely to clusters running in your cloud and manage them for you. And that's actually the most productive environment in many ways, because you have as a customer, you have control of the data. It's being processed by open source code, but we're able to take the pain out of automating things like upgrades for you. We're also there, if something goes wrong, we can often identify it before you even see it. So we do a lot of proactive monitoring, and we're able to correct problems before they become an issue for users. So I think these are ways that we fit into open source solutions and allow people to use open source really successfully.
Yeah, that's I can only agree with that. So we mentioned earlier that open source doesn't mean it's easy to use. So it may be easy to start, but when you build a real application, there are a lot of challenges and you need help. So our goal is to make you as a user successful with ClickHouse. And we have all tools to make you successful.
Yeah. And I would add, like what gets us stressed out, or what's getting me personally stressed out, is if I don't feel like we're doing a good job of helping our customers have exactly that successful experience in ClickHouse. That's when I feel like we're not doing that, that's when we have sort of meetings at Altinity to try and figure out, okay, what's the problem here? How do we help people better and make sure that their experience is a good one, even though it may not always be good for us. We're kind of like the duck, sort of, look calm on the top, but paddling frantically underneath.
Love that imagery.
That's how it has to be. That's it's a user experience. This is user experiences. Your stuff stays up. It's fast. It doesn't, when you have a question, you get a quick answer. You get those things, and as a user, you're going to be pretty happy. So that's our goal, is to provide that.